everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today, as we're continuing our unit in economic and personal finance on economic basics, we're going to talk about supply and demand, extremely important in economics. And we're basically going to also, we are going to talk about how it's measured on a graph, which seems complicated, but it's really not. It's not math, so much so it actually uses a whole different set of logic than actual math. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So to start out today, let's talk about demand. All right, so demand doesn't mean want. I'm going to talk about what it does mean. It's an economic principle that measures the desire of people's desire to purchase something, all right, of a specific good or service. Demand, how much people want it. However, don't fall into the trap of thinking just because everybody wants something, that means demand is high for it. What do you mean, Mr. Wagstaff? This here's a yacht. I'd like to have a yacht and a whole crew to run it. Just gallivant around the world in tropical locations on my ridiculous mansion on a lake or on the ocean. Because I want a yacht in no way contributes to demand because I can't buy it. All right. So demand only matters if you can buy it and you actually will. That is how demand is measured, by the ability of people to actually purchase something. Just because everybody wants it doesn't increase demand. So like yacht companies could go out of business. I don't know much about the yacht industry, but if they made 1 million yachts, they'd go out of business because if they're all trying to sell them for millions and millions of dollars is what yachts go for, I guess. Again, I'm not big into the yacht industry. I just know I want one and I can't afford it. And because I can't afford a yacht, in no way affect demand for a yacht. All right. So there's also this thing with demand of wants and the ability to buy stuff. There's this thing called the law of demand. All right. Now this is a lot of common sense. A lot of this is common sense, and we're just associating like vocab terms here with common sense as we move forward in this course, and we can just reference like these vocab words and you can connect this with like common sense. So the law of demand is the fundamental principle of economics that says the higher price is, the consumers will demand a lower quantity of it. And the opposite is also true. So if price goes up, all right, people will buy less. Price goes down, people buy more. This is why, like Bath and Body Works, this is a picture here, 75% off clearance coupon. Why do you think they do that? Do you think people buy more stuff or less stuff when there's a big sale? The law of demand says prices go down, people buy more. The other part of that is if price goes up, people buy less. I was trying to think of an example, and our market's pretty smart. Since we have a mixed economy, people are smart, America's founded on capitalism, people usually don't price themselves out of business. Usually. So it's actually hard for me to find something that is actually more expensive today than it used to be, even when you count in inflation. And I found one, and it's cable prices. Like Spectrum cable, when people are having cable boxes in their homes, the price of that has continuously gone up. So the law of demand says since the price keeps going up, less people will buy it. Absolutely. There's a whole term for this in this industry called cord cutters. People just have Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus. That's literally in my house. I grew up, or at least I guess in college I had cable. But then when it was time for me to purchase it myself, I saw how expensive it was. I was like, I will just go without. If cable was cheaper and it was a lower price, I would have bought it. But that's the law of demand. When the price goes up, demand diminishes. And demand is the willingness of people to purchase it. So the question here is, in your own words, explain what demand is and why it is so important in an economy. So again, demand isn't want, it's the ability and willingness to spend money. our economy only works because keep in mind the government doesn't like give us money. They like we have to make money. So we buy stuff, we sell our services. Like I'm a school teacher, I like market my services to a school district and they hire me. But if I said I would like $20 million a year to teach virtual economic and personal finance, absolutely not. Because my price is too high, there's no demand for that. They're not willing to pay that. So demand is really important because you have to keep demand going in an economy so that people will spend money. If everything is too expensive, people won't buy it. If it's too cheap, you can't make a profit, which is a whole nother question or concept that we'll talk about in the future. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, so no way around this. There's some graphs that take place in economics. So it is not a math class. So much so that if you were really good at math, don't use your math brain here. That's one of the only times you're ever going to hear me say that, because the X and Y, if you think of geometry, like the X and the Y when we talk about graphs, are opposite in economics for whatever reason. They're just like, math rules, nope. So the X and the Y are opposite in this. So X is on the horizontal axis and the Y is vertical. So you're like, oh, math, it's really not hard. It's really not. You have to understand it, and I want to explain it, and it makes sense because it's in this here, when we talk about the demand curve and there's going to be a supply curve, but the demand curve, it's pretty much a straight line in one direction, and it slants down, all right? So the demand curve, the official definition, is a graphical representation, means it's a graph, of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded for a given period of time. What in the world does that mean? Let's just use gasoline, all right? So most of you guys at this point are drivers or have had to pay gas before or probably will be at some point. So let's talk about the price of gas, all right? And we'll live in a fictional world where these are actual gas prices. And here on the graph, if you notice, demand always slopes down, all right? So as the quantity of gallon increases, the price decreases. That is across the board. As you start mass producing things, right, the cost of each individual unit gets less. So demand graph, as more gallons are sold, the price goes down. In theory, this also assumes, when we talk about these graphs, and I like to use gas because we're all familiar with gas, this assumes all the other variables remain the same, meaning Saudi Arabia doesn't be like, no, we want to cut back supply and all these other variables that take place in the real world. But here in general, the more gas you pump into society, the lower the price will be. There's a demand for it. The more you satisfy that demand, the less the demand is. So the more you put into society, the lower the price is. It is important to realize demand always goes down on a scale. Obviously, they would like to sell all of them at the really expensive $2.20 per gallon here, but the law of demand and the way it is graphed, all right, and this is how it works in the real world, there's sciencey to the market economy. The more gallons you have, the less each gallon costs. And while we always use it on a demand curve, you can put it in a table here if you wanted to. And this is the same thing as this, all right? So why don't, Mr. Wagstaff, why don't we just use a table for everything and then we can just find out what the price is for each one? Well, the reason we use a graph, and it's literally called a demand graph, and again, it always goes down. Demand graphs is important. It is, I keep saying it because it's important. It always goes down because the price is on the left side and the quantity is on the right side. Or the price is on the left side, quantity is on the bottom. So the higher the quantity, the lower the price. All right? Demand curves are always set up like this, and it's always, when I say a straight line, it's a curve. But it goes down. All right? There's a reason we use a graph and not a table like this, and I'll explain it to you. But so the question is, why do demand graphs always go down? because the more you produce of it, each individual unit is less. Just like, why is that? Like, there's a lot of things in economics. Like, why is that? Two answers to that. Number one, because it said so. It's just a law. It just does. And number two, you're going to get outside my area of expertise. Just know it's a thing that does happen. There are like doctors and people smarter than me in economics that can absolutely answer that. There's a lot of whys in economics, and it's very much a science and a consistency thing. But answer this completely in multiple sentences, and we're moving on. So let's go to supply. All right. So supply is the amount of stuff that exists. So you're making something needed or wanted available to someone. All right. So literally supply and demand, they work together. So this graph here is, if you understood this graph 100% and just knew it by heart, oof, this course is going to be super easy. This might be the first time you've ever seen this. So let me give you a basic idea here on where to start at with this. So like demand goes up, supply remains unchanged, price goes up. The next one is demand goes down and supply is unchanged, price goes down. In this class, associate demand with price, all right? If demand goes up, the price goes up. If everybody desperately wants something, all right, and the supply is unchanged, it means we're like, well, gallons of gas, everybody wanted it, and the price went down. Supply increased. They started making more, all right? And when there's more in society, there's less demand because there's less people that still want to buy it because everybody already has it. So if there's the same amount, so say you have a baseball card and it's worth $2, all right? Because that's what people will pay for it, or who cares? Then all of a sudden you find out that it is the only card left of this super famous, did I say basketball card, baseball card? I don't remember. This is the rookie card of this one guy, and all of a sudden it's the only one left, and demand, everybody that's a card collector around the country desperately comes and wants to buy it. You gonna sell that for $2? No. How much you gonna sell it for? How much they're willing to pay. Look at that. You figured it out. That's our economy. When everybody wanted that card, the price skyrocketed. Say all of a sudden you have a $1,000 fancy Pokemon card, and then you come to find out that it's fake. Does anybody want to buy that $1,000 fake card? No. Demand plummets. Guess what happens to the price of it? It's going to plummet. Demand and price are interconnected. All right. It's very, very, very important. All right. So supply is the amount of stuff. So if you had that super rare Pokemon card and it was a real one, it was $1,000. Then all of a sudden they just found there were 6 million other ones made and then produced all over the place. Well, the supply is all over. Nobody's gonna pay $1,000 for them when they're all over the place. So when supply goes up, all right, and demand is unchanged here, the price goes down. All right. So this is why competition is so incredibly important for supply and demand, all right? So when competition happens between companies, and we had talked about Pepsi and Coke in the past, we had talked about AT&T. In markets where there's a bunch of competition, what they have done is increase supply because they're competing with each other. When supply increase, all right, that means demand is going to go down. You saw the demand curve. The more it's increased, it goes down. So the more competition, the more supply in the market means price comes down, and it very much affects it because you're satisfying demand. So competition is the main force in an economy when it comes to supply and demand. Meaning, if there is a lot of competition, there's a lot of supply. And demand goes down, that's great for buyers because we all want something, and it'll be cheaper because there's a high supply of it. If there's not any competition and there's a monopoly and you only have to buy it from one person, in our example that we had used was Microsoft. If Microsoft decides, hey, I know you all want my operating system, it's $10,000. And he said that, now granted there's gonna be fallout from that, but it's going to, there's no other company that can say we have the equivalent product, because it's definitely not a perfect competition. It's the opposite, imperfect competition, being a monopoly. There's no other company that can come out and say, hey, we have the same product for cheaper and you can buy it from us. Because if that had happened, then Microsoft has to lower their price to compete. Competition brings prices down and it regulates supply and demand and brings it closer to perfect competition in our mixed economy. So the question here is, why is competition the main force behind both supply and demand? So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, supply curve. Well, that sounds like demand curve. And you would be correct, all right? So supply curve is literally the opposite of a demand curve, all right? So just like with the demand curve, it's opposite. The quantity is on the bottom, all right? And the price is on the left. And let's keep it simple here. Let's talk about gas prices. We talked about gas prices with demand, and we're going to talk about gas prices with supply. If you remember, when we talked about demand, the price of gas, all right, as more units were sold, the price went down. That is the law of demand, that is the demand curve. This is the supply curve, using the exact same data that we had for the demand curve, all right? Notice, all right, that the more quality of gasoline that is sold, all right, so bear with me, the quantity of gasoline, the more that is sold, the higher the price is. What? So with demand, on the demand curve, the more oil you put into the economy, if you're just looking at demand, all right, demand is going to go down and therefore price is going to go down. With supply though, and this is a whole separate graph, whole different mentality, all right, that the more that people want a limited resource, all right, the price goes up because companies that are producing stuff can't produce enough to satisfy everybody's want. And you're like, all right, Mr. Wagstaff, it sounds like you're talking in riddles here. Understand that a supply, all right, that the more people want to buy stuff, all right, the price goes up, and in demand, the more people make stuff, the price goes down. They're opposite. Supply graphs always go up, all right, because the more people want to buy, it makes it cost more. And you're like, aren't you just talking about demand? It's how economics works. The more people want to buy, and the more they actually purchase of the supply, it makes the price goes up because there's less left over to buy. And you're like, you're blowing my mind. Bear with me because this is going to make sense. It's going to be like, oh, okay, this makes more sense now. So demand is a curve that always goes down, demand curve. Supply curve always goes up. Stick with me. Once again, Mr. Wagstaff, why can't we just use a graph like this and it makes everything so much easier instead of, oh, you're like making me like kind of do math, even though economics is a different type of math. Why is this happening? It's going to make sense. So bear with me. I know your brain's like, what is that? So the question here is, why do supply graphs always go up? All right, because price always goes up as people keep buying more of something, because there's less left over, causing demand to go up. Supply and demand are interconnected. So supply graphs always go up because the more people buy of something, price will eventually go up because it's increasing the demand. Production for demand goes down. Pause me, answer that completely. Stay with me because I'm going to make it make sense here. So here's what's going to make it make sense is the concept of equilibrium. Equilibrium is a pivotal aspect of supply and demand. This is where every company, gas companies, everybody wants to be. This is a state in which the supply and demand for a given good or service are in balance. Equilibrium means balance. Supply and demand mean balance. All right, Mr. Wagstaff, I'm with you. I'm with you. I've really wanted to turn this off for a while now, but I'm with you. All right. So how does this make it simple? Because supply and demand, they're both, those curves are on the same graph. you can literally graph using actual real data, both of those on the same graph. This is an oversimplified version of that graph. So the red line is demand, because remember, demand always goes down. Supply, all right, because it has to do with price, always goes up. So in demand, the higher the quantity, all right, the price goes down. In supply, the higher the quantity, the price goes up. So how do you know how much to sell it for? Is that dot right in the middle, right where it crosses it. Supply and demand. So the supply curve, all right, which always goes up, demand curve always goes down. All right, where they cross it, that's the happy medium. That's where people will pay for it. All right, so markets really look at demand. They don't want to put themselves out of business by lowering the prices. Supply, they don't want to make prices so high that people won't buy it. So it's right where supply and demand cross it. That is the equilibrium point. That is how you know what to sell your products for. And in the case we've been talking about is gasoline. That would be the happy medium right there, where people are willing to pay for it. So the question is, how can you tell on a graph of supply and demand where the equilibrium is? It's where they intersect. Whenever you see a graph in two lines and they intersect, that intersection means something. In economics, that is the equilibrium. So supply always goes up, demand always goes down. Where they cross that is the equilibrium. So hopefully I didn't break your brains too much there, because economics, it's a whole different world of science, and it feels like you jump back and forth, doesn't it? But answer that completely. That's what I got for you guys today. See you guys tomorrow.